Black Snake Station. How quickly time changes. Only a moment had passed when the Elb duchies were still part of the Danish crown, but like a cold drop of water disappears on a hot stone, such moments vanish too. While the Confederate army had surrendered, on the other side of the globe the Elb duchies were conquered by Prussia and Austria. The months of 1865 passed, and the desire to travel on foot or transport massive equipment using horses passed even faster. One mode of transport had already prevailed over all others, and continued to play a key role. The Royal Westphalian Railway Company already had a permanent position in the Kingdom of Prussia, and expanded its rail network wherever it could. Its tender locomotives made their way through the heart of the country like a snake. Like a fox it smelled the opportunity to place train stations in strategically important places. Its black cloak spread out, covering every little corner. But it was not kindness that made them build railway stations across the country, and the fascination about this new type of travel was hardly Prussia's greatest motivation. It was surely not comparable to the smell of young roses which spread across the whole country. It was the smell of sulphur and putrefaction. That fragrance also attracted those who dreamed of painful screams and rain of lead. Jendris Balge also dreamed often, sometimes even too much. Fresh air was pushed into his nose so that he soaked it up with pleasure while he examined the building that rose before him. A few weeks ago he had received an invitation saying that he had been chosen alone to serve his country in a very special way. A man standing in the front door of the building greeted him, just like Jendris himself. He wore a blue-colored uniform, which was cut short and tight, its gray trousers pulled up high. This is how they met and introduced each other. The station was said to be new, well kept, and furnishings were of finest quality. Like his uniform, new and well kept, or at least familiar. Jendris also thought that every part of the train station complex in Höxter would be. The main building itself was actually a gem of Prussian architecture. Only the remote freight station didn't seem to be in a good condition. Obviously, it had been largely completed. Only a small part still had to be built up, but seemingly it wasn't decided to do that, and the whole building was left to decay. It must have been unused for some time. Moisture had already formed in some places, so that greenish shimmer could be seen covering some stones. After Jandris took a seat in a chair, he waited for the officer to sit down. That one observed the board which illustrated the stops between Altenbeken via Höxter to Holzminden. Suddenly he turned around, plunged into his chair, and looked at Jendris with eyes half closed, surrounded by black mist, tired and worn out. "Jendris Balge, I knew you would be able to find your way here without any trouble. Unfortunately, I don't have much time, and will leave after our conversation, without any doubt. You expected to take care of the railway station's main building, but I have to disappoint you. The freight yard remained a long time unused, but it will play an important key role in the next few days and weeks. Take uppermost care of the stored goods, day and night. Make sure that our goods remain undamaged. If you have received the letter, you know the contents of the boxes and what we are preparing for. Actually, more soldiers should guard the goods, but many of them were relocated, and it will probably take a little while before a whole squad can settle down here. Well, for now, you should unpack your belongings and start the inspection and inventory of the goods." Jendris saluted, then said goodbye to the officer who seemed in a hurry. Hastily he left the freight yard without even taking a look back. Sure, getting out of his tight uniform seemed a comfortable thought to Jendris, but he quickly pushed that thought out of his mind. Instead of relaxing a while, he began to remove dust and cobwebs that had conquered every corner of the building over time. The afternoon had passed, and the sun slowly disappeared, throwing its last few sheds of light through some trees atop the hills. When Jendris had filled the desk in front of him with memorabilia, an old silver pocket watch, a music box which was decorated with the figure of a ballerina, and the picture of his beloved woman, reminded him of some happy times. He dreamed of how he met her for the first time. It was one day in April in a forest under a bright green flowering tree. She looked at her pocket watch, which was hanging around her waist. She was about to go away when he stopped her. Only a short time later, thunderbolts filled the air and painted a blue faint glow into the sky. And the safest place to hide was found soon in the kitchen of her parents' house. They talked for hours and forgot about time when suddenly a teapot started to whistle. It whistled louder, and its sound increased until it became unbearable. The whistle turned into a howling. The howling turned into a hateful sound until Jendris cried out and threw his hands over his ears. He looked up and found himself lying on a wooden box. The last locomotive left the station and had just given its signal. "There'll be no more locomotives arriving today," Jendris thought. It was already evening, and the light from the sky was hardly visible. So he had to light his candle lantern and waited the next few hours in the small guard room until he decided to go through the hall again and check the goods. He only had taken one step into the storage room when he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, because it looked like a gray figure would stand there behind one of the boxes. He quickly threw the light in its direction, but had to recognize that it was only a gray blanket, covering a small box and protecting it from dust and dirt. His heart was now beating irregularly, since he hadn't expected to be inferior to an imagination. Angry with himself, he threw the blanket back on the small box and turned around when he heard a knock from behind. Startled, he tore down the blanket again, being astonished that the knock had stopped abruptly. He took a closer look at the small box and saw that a little part of it had broken off and that a small object was leaking out of that hole. He gently pulled out a small jar. A smile crossed his face as if he had found a treasure, and he surely found a treasure, because it seemed to be a bottle of laudanum. Fate had undoubtedly done him a great favor, since he could use laudanum very well in this situation. As soon as he had taken a little bit of the medicine, the door behind him creaked. He heard a soft buzz that seemed to originate from the door column, and he noticed a pale blue light shining through, followed by a warm summer breeze and a fresh, lovely fragrance which he recognized immediately. He could hardly believe it when the door opened wider, because the pale blue light grew stronger first, then again seemed weakened. It was apparently rotating in a circle, moving like smoke through the hall before it stopped, and the shape of a woman emerged from it. As she moved towards Jendris, she spoke in a gentle voice. "A wave of light that carried me softly, it made me fly through hallways dark
And when I reached your chamber safely, a voice spoke to you, please now do hark. Do not spit on others as they don't spit on you. The black snake gate is open. They'll sneak into your green garden too.
Jendris could barely see her, but he was convinced that he just heard his beloved woman's voice. The clearer her shape became, the better he could remember a past day talking to her, though his memory felt blurry and not quite right. He had walked slowly towards her on that very day, grabbing the music box from the desk and hiding it behind his back. He had whispered,
My dear, I'm sincerely sorry. I might have to move away from here for a short time because I have been ordered to care for valuable goods. Please forgive me as a sign of my everlasting love for you, and to be sure that you do not forget me and remain loyal to me during the time of my absence, I'd like to give you this music box. You know, whenever you think of me and whenever you miss my presence, let it play its music.
She took the music box with a grateful expression on her face and smiled at him, but soon her eyes went down, her eyebrows contracted while she opened the music box and put it on the table. Jendris liked to listen to the melody. For him it was one of the most beautiful melodies he had ever heard. Even without music box, the song sounded in his mind.
Oh, if I would have 100,000 guilders!
He hummed along with the melody. But when the tune had finished playing, and he opened his eyes again, his beloved woman was gone. Instead, a cold breath caught him from behind. He quickly turned around, reached for the music box, and threw it into a swarm of gray smoke, which began to form a shape. The music box shattered when it hit the wall, making a clinking sound that shocked him. The grayish figure had vanished as quickly as it had come. He fearlessly inspected the corner and lifted up a part of the music box. His heart was grieved, since he had given it quite big importance. His eyes sadly observed the ballerina of the music box, while he tried to avert the grief of his loss. He looked closer at her, trying to imagine the box would still be undamaged, as if he had never threw it on the wall. He looked at her dress, her eyes, her hair, even her mouth, and he was happy about every detail. The longer he looked at the mouth, the more he thought he would have seen her lips moving, almost the way his woman's lips used to move. Then he imagined that she really spoke to him, reciting a poem.
The garden green, it's wasted. Temptation now is everywhere. Demons you made contracts with, but you don't seem to care. A lover's song once played in your heart, but those times were forgotten long ago. Your saber is closer now to you. Can't you remember that you gave me a blow?
Again startled, he also threw the rest of the music box on the next wall. What was it that made him shiver? Had he wronged her somehow? Or were the words that she spoke unpleasant to him? He tried to find a solution, searched in his mind that seemed to be a labyrinth now. But he couldn't find a logical conclusion, even when he dug as deep into his mind as he could. Full of grief and anger that his mind did not understand what was happening, he looked around wildly because he needed a hold, a helping hand that would free him from the confusion of his thoughts. Right in the moment when he was about to run out of the building where it all started, he heard a voice that called his name audibly. He searched intensely and listened carefully to find out from which direction the voice came. Not far from his desk in the guard's room, he heard the voice loud and clear. It was a deep, dark voice that no longer called him by his name, but stammered words in a language he didn't know. The voice was heard louder, and he suspected its origin from behind the old board that the officer before him had observed carefully. Jendris was considered to be a fearless man, but now he felt like experiencing the sheer horror. When he took the board aside, he saw a picture on the wall, and a figure lifting itself out of it. A shock went through his body, his heart pounded faster, and he wasn't able to move. For a moment he thought the figure didn't recognize his presence, but then it went fast forward and stopped right in front of him. Silently it touched Jendris with its half-rotten, skinny fingers, as if to express that he would have no chance to run or to hide. Slowly it touched his cheeks, ran its fingers through his face and down his dainty uniform. Its dusty rag-like clothes slid down his left sleeve, and he was filled with disgust until fear and anger came over him equally. Suddenly Jendris could move again, and he immediately grabbed his saber and struck the figure with all the strength he could afford, so that the grayish figure dissolved into black fog. As soon as the figure was gone, he closed his eyes and tried to calm down. None of this really happens, he told himself. Convinced of his own words, he opened his eyes again. He was increasingly pleased with the picture that now arose before his very eyes, since he saw his beloved woman, who filled a teapot with water and put it on an oven. She smiled at him and walked over to the table he was standing close to. She hugged him while reading a letter Jendris held in his hands. Her mood changed quickly. His heart almost stopped when he saw these lovely eyes looking down. Her eyebrows contracted, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She started to scream. The teapot whistled louder. A fearful sound filled the air which blew his mind. Almost stunned, he laid the letter down carefully and grabbed the music box, slowly approaching her. She tore her gray coat from the clothes rack and ran through the kitchen door, but she wasn't fast enough and fell to the ground when the music box hit her head. Dark clouds came up, thunderbolts filled the air, and painted a blue faint glow into the sky. But he hardly cared about it. He carried her into the forest and dug a hole at the front of a tree. Despite the storm, he pushed the shovel into the ground many times and tried with all his might to dig the hole as deep as possible. After many hours, which lasted until dawn, he was finally done and dragged her body to the edge of the hole. Jendris reached for his shovel when he realized that she had regained consciousness and already had stood up. He dropped his shovel again and stared at her with cold, hateful eyes. She could only shout his name and stammer a few words with all remaining strength, words of love and forgiveness. But the words she stammered sounded like as if she was gargling, and it made him furious again. He grabbed the silver pocket watch that was wrapped around her waist and pushed her into the hole at the same time. Immediately afterwards, the shovel put an end to his memory, and he waited in front of the tree in his rain-drenched clothes until the first rays of sun broke through the overcast sky, and the smell of last night's thunderstorm disappeared. The weather in April always had something volatile, and whatever appeared deeply gray turned into a light green flowering tree the next moment. Once the forest was drenched in light, Jendris closed his eyes and fell asleep.
He woke up at the foot of the desk in the guard's office of the freight yard. After lifting himself up, he rubbed his eyes and remained astonished of what he could see in the morning's dawn. The rising sun's light shone through a few stacked boxes standing at the farthest wall, revealing the unfinished part of the freight yard.
A green flowering tree forced its branches through some of the undeveloped areas of the building and had already brought down some of the bricks. Jendris peeked through the crumbled bricks and saw a beautiful large garden which was shrouded in bright light. But some of the boxes were partially rotten, and their wooden panels had crumbled and broken. Jendris took a closer look, and the view made him being frightened. His feet felt like ice lumps, and his heart thumped audibly louder. Numerous large black snakes crawled out of the rotten boxes, and soon covered the blooming garden. He took a few steps back, but had to stop the next moment, as his beloved woman stood before him, as if she had never left. But she signaled him not to be afraid, and spoke.
When I saw the letter, I knew what kind of goods you had to guard. If you had only let me help you, I just wanted to save your soul.
Jendris' courage was completely gone. He fully remembered his actions and knelt down before her, with tearful, pleading eyes, saying,
Apologies for all my blasphemy. I'm sorry. I deeply regret what I have done. I promise you that I'll change myself, and even if you don't allow me to live on, I beg you to take me into the pale blue light you appeared from. There was such a warm, soothing breeze coming over me when you stepped through it. This must be beautiful. And we could be together again, right?
she was full of compassion and warm hearted, but telling lies was not in her nature, and thus she had to tell him the whole truth.
This is the place to which I return. The place you go is filled with cold black shadows, with fog of war and spirits who enjoyed their evil doings all their life through. Did you enjoy yours as long as possible? It is uncertain how long you will stay there. Remember, your life was much longer than mine. You had such a long time to think about your actions. Did you let all those chances pass that generously? Then I can no longer help you. It is not in my power. There is only one thing you could do. Maybe it would make the punishment milder.
She pointed at a heavy steel rod that was lying on the ground in front of his desk. That night had changed him so much. All the things he saw and felt left no doubt about what he should do to make the punishment a little bit milder. He took the steel rod and opened all boxes. He opened every single one and immediately hit the snakes rushing out of it. Soon there was only one black snake left. Jendris, who was no longer afraid after the experiences of that night, grabbed her and held her in front of his face, trying to take a direct look into her eyes. Her eyes' look, however, penetrated his, and he soon loosened his hand's grip completely, so that the snake could free itself again. Her bite felt cold and hideous, made Jendris slip away. The only luck he had when the snake bore its teeth into his flesh were some objects falling into his hands, which he thankfully held until the pain was over. A whole week passed until a group of soldiers reached the freight yard in order to prepare some of the boxes for their transport. But shortly after they entered the building,
They immediately had a messenger sent to deliver a disturbing message, because all of the boxes were broken and their contents could have been easily stolen. But instead of that, all of the firing pin rifles were lying scattered and broken on the floor. Only a single rifle had not been smashed. It lay in front of a picture on the desk and was aimed at the gray face of the guard officer. His mouth was wide open and his face contorted with pain, as if something had violently taken his life and soul. Apparently, the man had died a terrible death, but he could not have committed suicide using the rifle, since there was a music box in his right hand and a silver pocket watch in his left.